friend of mine called me just a little while ago, and we started chatting about something that had happened to him, and something that really bummed him out. He was super concerned about, frustrated with, judging himself, etc., etc. And then he came face to face with another situation that didn't happen to him, that actually happened to somebody else, and it was significantly more powerful to him in the hearing of what took place, that spurred him to think about, my God, like, I'm sitting here bitching and moaning and complaining about X, and this just happened to this person. Like, perspective, man, like perspective. And it's always so interesting and fascinating how we don't often take into consideration having the exercising the ability within inside to access that part of ourselves and say, let's put this in perspective. I was sharing on a previous episode about this expression that I heard years ago, which is, my backache hurts me more than your backache hurts me. And listening to that dynamic, because it's what's happening to me and the experience of it. And sometimes we lose perspective, and then sometimes we gain it. I had a chance to watch a movie the other night with my daughter, and it talked and there were several scenes of people fleeing a country, a war-torn country, and literally through the uncertainty of literally escaping their own country, having a life, having friends, having family, things that their workforce strive for. And they really set up in the beginning of this movie this real sense of family. And then all of a sudden displacement, and then all of a sudden running for your life, and all the things that go along with that, and then finding yourself in another country and being considered a refugee and being treated differently, and all the paperwork, and just all the things that go on. And my daughter was sitting there watching. She goes, wow. She goes, that's pretty wild stuff. Like, I never realized. I said, yeah. So when we sit sometimes, and I kind of said to her, I said, so when we sit sometimes and complain about this thing or that thing, or something that's going on at school, or what we didn't have for dinner, what we should have ordered, something like that, it kind of puts it in a little perspective, doesn't it? She goes, yeah. And it really touched her in that moment, but I also then saw her like bury herself back into her phone. And I realized that we all do that. We all have these moments, just like my friend had his moment, just like I have my moments, where we all of a sudden go, wow, that really puts things in perspective, like things could be much worse. But truth be told, that kind of stuff doesn't always last. We fall back into the rhythm of our own lives, the pattern of old thinking and old behaviors, and we don't create a scenario where, above and beyond in that moment, we don't create a scenario where something becomes sticky, and we kind of go back to what we've always done. And I find that happens a lot of times with people when we talk about the inside game and how important that is, and they're like, yeah, I really get that it's important. And I say, well, if you need to be willing to do this, you need to consider doing this, and thinking about this throughout the day and all this stuff. Oh, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And then 5 minutes later, which in my terms is like a couple days, feels like 5 minutes later, you're sharing another conversation with them, or you're seeing something they're posting, and it's like the antithesis of everything that we talked about. It's like back to where they were. It keeps revisiting of the past. So I've really been sitting with it a lot lately, and seeing how that happens, not only for a lot of other people that I come in contact with, and for friends, for family, my own daughters, right? But how that shows up for me, and why it's so important from an inside game perspective, why it's so significant from an inside game perspective, to not just learn something, right? Not just learn something like, oh, I learned something through watching this movie, and it really made me realize how fortunate I am and how grateful I am for all that I have. But how do you then take that, forward with you? And why don't most of us, in the vast majority of situations, really allow something like that really hits us so powerfully in a moment to become sticky, and it just stays with us? And it's not to say that that doesn't happen for people from time to time. But in a lot of situations that I've watched, that stickiness isn't there. So they learn something, but then they don't really do anything with it. They have a new awareness, but it becomes an awareness in that moment, and then they're back to whatever then occupies their space, whatever occupies their time. So I realized that one of the things that really needs to happen for all of us in the process, and why things don't always necessarily get sticky, is we have to learn how to unlearn. Like, there is indeed an unlearning process that must take place in order for us to then learn something new and actually take it forward and go with it. Because if we don't unlearn it, if we don't understand that in its time and place, it had its own perspective, it had its own impact, but it no longer serves us, if we really don't understand that, and we're really not ready for that, then nothing can come in and take its place. Nothing will come in and take its place. We'll tell the story. Oh, I remember that happened to me. And you'll tell the story, and then you'll re-experience perspective and the power of perspective and gratitude and whatever else may come forward for you in that moment by the retelling of the story. But it's not sticky. So the answer from my perspective, in order to really establish a consistent inside game and an inside game plan moving forward, is what must we first unlearn before we can learn or relearn? What is the old story that we keep telling ourselves that needs to be put to rest? What are the old beliefs that really genuinely no longer serve us, that need to be unearthed, that need to be exposed, that need to be ultimately released in an unlearning process? See, if over time you develop a cavity and they remove the cavity, they don't just go, oh, we took the cavity out. They replace it, they repack it, they do what dentists do in order to secure the tooth again, in order for it to be strong moving forward. They don't leave a hole in your tooth. So the goal isn't just the unlearning, and the goal isn't just the learning of new material. It's the combination of those two that allows us to remove something that no longer serves us, to unlearn something that no longer serves us, and replace it with something that does. And replace it not just with a thought, not just with reframing the words that we're using, but put into some place, some form of action that helps to solidify what it is that we've learned. See, as an example, for some people, they'll see, like as an example, they'll see a homeless person and they'll go, oh, wow, like look at that person on the side of the road. How sad is that? Like, I sit here and complain about this. Yeah, I know where my next meal is coming. That person doesn't even know where their next meal is coming. And I'm sitting here worried about what my next meal is going to be. Wow. And so you go into this place in the moment, this place of momentary gratitude for what you do have, which is wonderful. But where do you take it? Where do you go with it? If you don't put something into play, into action, and do something, then how are you really signifying that you've actually learned something new? Otherwise, it's just in a moment, and then that moment's gone. and nothing has been unlearned. And truly, from a significant consistency standpoint, nothing has really been learned. And like I said, only to be repeated where somebody's telling a story about some homeless situation. They go, "Oh, and they go, "Oh, yeah, that happened to me once. I was driving down the road and I saw this guy, and he had this dog, and the dog was emaciated, and it really put things in perspective." Really, put what in perspective? Like that, you're now back in that moment of perspective. There's no stickiness to it. So as soon as you finish telling that story, and as soon as something else comes up, as soon as somebody sends you a text message that's distressing, that moment's gone. So there's a process that has to happen of unlearning. And that can be utilizing inside game tools like gratitude, like self-forgiveness, like taking an existing old belief system that no longer works for you and then reframing it, utilizing words that actually make sense moving forward. Where you're literally changing the narrative from an old narrative of this is how I used to be to this is how I am now and moving forward. Awesome. Now, take that and move forward with it and do something. So the person who keeps having these profound momentary lapses of, or I should say, momentary moments of inspiration because of perspective of a homeless person that gets re-triggered when somebody else tells a homeless person story, when they see something on TV where they notice somebody on the side of the road again. Do something for homeless people, perhaps. Do something where you're contributing, so that what you're doing is you're not only shifting the old narrative, but you're creating a new narrative moving forward, and you're embedding it in a truthfulness and an honesty within, because you're actually taking action upon it. You're taking the unlearning and you're learning something and you're putting it into play. See, that's the difference. If you don't put it into play, whatever it may be, it doesn't always have to be something huge or big or significant. But if you'll notice, when you see somebody out in the world who's doing something really, really powerful, and you're going, wow, that's really admirable that they're involved in this. And then you hear their story. They have a story that they will share. This is how I saw the world. This is how I experienced the world. And then this happened. And even though they're not saying this, and I had to unlearn that as truth, create a new truth, and then take action upon that new truth to embed that truth, to embed my commitment, to embed a new belief, to embed a new idea and a new concept of how I want to show up in the world. There's always that story there. And when you do that, when you have an understanding of that, you have the experience of that, then you're actually taking this process of going, I'm really ready to unlearn something that no longer serves me, that no longer serves my life, that no longer works. Maybe it never worked, doesn't matter. Maybe it worked for a period of time and no longer works. The bottom line is there's this awareness of your inside game voice, using that inside game voice and asking the question, what do I need to unlearn here? What do I need to release and let go of? What is it that is preventing me from having anything more than momentary perspective, momentary gratitude, momentary appreciation for something? Because man, oh man, when you're able to transform that and embed some new belief, to do exercises that reflect the unlearning and the learning and the relearning, and then the willingness at that point to then take action in the world to confirm your commitment to that learning. So that becomes a part of who you are and what you do in the world. That is the culmination of an inside game leading to a dynamic outside game. That's the stickiness factor that so many people tend to miss. So when you take the situations in your life and look at them and maybe make a, always keep a pad. I always like to keep a pad. I have paper everywhere and I'll write things down as soon as it comes forward because, man, oh man, I'll go to write one of my quotes and I'll say, no, I can't write it right now, but I'll remember it. I never do. I never remember it. So I have to write a word down. I have to write a part of it down, even if it's not the right thing, but I know it's in alignment with where I have to write it down. You got to write it down. So pay attention, like write down where you realize moments in your day where all of a sudden you have these powerful moments of perspective, of deeper awarenesses of just how grateful and how lucky and how fortunate you are. And that often the things that we most are upset about or complain about are so small. But what's on the other side of the smallness of what it is that we're complaining about is a bigger picture for us, a bigger way of showing up, a bigger way of creating an opportunity for ourselves and other people, because the perspective needs to be launched. The way we had been to this point required us to unlearn something, to replace it with something else, to learn something new, to fill the empty space that old belief or that old thought or that old idea or that old emotion was sitting in, to fill that and to then take action out in the world. And not only do you win, everybody you come in contact with, and oftentimes people you'll never meet, they'll win too. I'm Mitch Newman. We'll see you again next time.